The storm rolled over the plains like a living beast, swallowing the last traces of daylight as it clawed across the sky. Caleb Brandt had worked enough seasons to know when a storm meant trouble, and this one was already beating against the barn doors with fists of wind. He pulled the last sack of grain inside, wiped the rain from his brow, and reached for the lantern to check the stalls before turning in for the night. But just as he lifted the light, something moved behind the haystack, too soft to be an animal, too desperate to be the wind. He froze, lantern raised high. "Who's there?" A trembling shape curled deeper into the shadows. Caleb took a slow step forward, his boots silent on the dirt floor. When the lantern glow finally reached the small figure, he stopped short. A young woman crouched low, mud-speckled face streaked with rain and fear, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked as though she'd been running for miles. The moment she realized he'd seen her, she pressed herself back against the boards, shaking like a leaf. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Don't hurt me." Caleb lowered the lantern until its light softened. "Ain't got a reason to hurt you." Her breath shuddered out. "Don't send me back. They're looking for me." Thunder cracked so loudly it rattled the rafters. She flinched violently. Caleb, moved by instinct more than thought, shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. She stiffened, then slowly clutched the heavy fabric as if it were a lifeline. "What's your name?" he asked, voice low and steady. "Elena," she murmured. "I ran away. They want to force me into a marriage I never agreed to. I couldn't stay. I thought I'd die out there." Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen enough cruelty for one lifetime, and something in her voice struck the part of him that still knew right from wrong. "You're safe here," he said after a moment. But the promise barely left his lips before the sound of fast hooves tore across the yard. Lanterns glowed through the cracks in the boards. Men shouted Elena's name. She shrank behind him, breath shallow. "They found me." Caleb blew out the lantern, plunging them into darkness. He stepped in front of her, a wall of muscle and calm determination. "If they ask," he whispered, "you're my wife now." "What?" she breathed, stunned. "No fear, I got you." He pushed the barn door open just enough to step out into the storm, facing the riders alone. Morning sunlight crept across the cabin floorboards, warm and quiet, so different from the chaos of the night before. Elena sat close to the fire, wrapped in one of Caleb's old wool blankets, her small hands cupped around a tin, mug as if she were afraid the warmth might disappear if she let go. Caleb stood near the stove, pouring himself coffee slowly, as though giving her space to breathe. He moved with the steady, deliberate motion of a man used to solitude, one who wasn't sure where to place his hands with another soul in the room. "You ain't gotta fear me," he said finally, voice calm and almost shy. "What I told those men, it was just to keep you safe." She lifted her gaze, her eyes softer than the night before. "You lied for me," she said, almost like she couldn't believe someone would. Caleb shrugged, though the gesture was thick with meaning. Storm or no storm, a person in need deserves a roof over their head. "Been a long time since I had company worth protecting is all." Elena studied him, noticing the quiet strength, woven through everything he did, the scar that trailed along his jaw, the broad frame shadowing half the room, the gentleness he tried to bury under his rough exterior. There was something grounding about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. "They'll come back for me," she whispered, as if speaking her fear might make it real. "I know." Caleb walked to the window and pushed the curtain aside. The plains stretched out wide and golden, but he had the uneasy sense of eyes somewhere in the distance. "But you stay here till you figure where you want to go. Nobody's touching you while you're under my roof." She hesitated. "I don't know where I'm going." "Then you'll stay till you do." Her lips trembled into a small, grateful smile. Caleb felt something shift in his chest at the sight of it, something new, something dangerous, something he hadn't let himself feel for anyone in a long time. Just before noon, distant hoofbeats echoed across the property. Caleb stiffened instantly. Elena's fingers curled tighter around the blanket. A group of riders emerged, more than before, too many. Caleb stepped outside, towering and silent, a wall of resolve. The leader glared down. "Brant, folks say you got yourself a wife without telling the preacher." "That so?" Caleb replied evenly. "We want proof." Before he could answer, Elena stepped onto the porch, Caleb's old coat wrapped around her fragile frame. She moved close, closer than he expected, her hand finding his. Caleb squeezed gently, grounding her. "That proof enough?" he asked. The riders stared, defeated, and one by one they turned their horses around and rode off, forced to accept the lie that had suddenly become much more than a lie. Inside, Elena trembled with relief. Caleb took her hand again, warm and steady. "Told you," he said softly. "I ain't letting them take you." The days that followed settled into a strange kind of peace, the kind that sneaks up on two people who never expected to share a roof. Elena woke early each morning to the soft clatter of Caleb fixing coffee, the smell drifting through, the small cabin like a promise that she was safe for one more day. She helped with little things, gathering eggs, sweeping the porch, stitching one of his shirts where an old tear had split. Caleb tried not to stare too long, but every time she moved through the cabin with quiet purpose, something in him softened in ways he didn't quite understand. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, how Caleb spoke little but always listened, how he paused before every word, like he wanted to make sure it didn't come out rougher than intended. She began to laugh again, small, hesitant laughs, but to Caleb they sounded like something sacred. In the evenings they would sit outside, watching the sky bleed into orange, then purple, then dark blue. Sometimes she would tell him stories about her life before all this, and he'd listen with a stillness that made her feel heard for the first time in years. But even peace has shadows. One evening, as the wind carried the scent of sage across the fields, Caleb discovered fresh boot prints circling the barn. He crouched down, heartbeat steady but heavy, fingers tracing the marks in the dirt. Whoever had made them hadn't bothered hiding their intent. Someone had been scouting the land, watching the cabin, watching Elena. He kept quiet through supper, but Elena wasn't blind. She noticed his shoulders tightened. The way he checked the windows twice before locking the door. She finally stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Caleb, tell me what's wrong," he sighed, lowering his gaze to her small hands clutching his shirt. "Tracks out by the barn. They're close." Fear flickered across her face, but she didn't back away. Instead, she stood taller, even if her hands trembled. "I don't want you hurt because of me." He lifted her chin gently, meeting her eyes. "Elena, you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. A reason to come home. A reason to fight. I ain't about to lose that." The knock didn't come, it crashed. The door splintered inward, and three men stumbled into the cabin with rage burning in their eyes. Elena gasped as Caleb pushed her behind him, his body instantly shifting from gentle giant to unmovable force. One man swung at him. Caleb caught the fist mid-air and threw him aside like a sack of grain. Another lunged with a knife, but Elena grabbed a lantern and hurled it toward Caleb's feet. The sudden burst of light, blinding their attackers long enough for Caleb to twist the knife out of the man's hand. Within moments, the fight was over. The men lay groaning on the floor. Caleb stood panting, sweat and fury glistening in the firelight. Elena ran to him, her arms wrapping around his solid frame without hesitation.